is my collection of office stamps. If someone were to ask me why I have a collection of office stamps, it's not entirely easy to answer that question. It might be that they have a certain nostalgic shimmer about them, or perhaps that they have an historic value. Or maybe it's because they become a bit redundant in today's management and digitization of paperwork. And somehow I feel a bit sorry for them, that I pity them somehow. And maybe this last reason is perhaps closest to the truth of why I have a collection of office stamps. Stamps, they've had an absolutely central role in various exercises of authority, municipal operations and bank systems. Their position right at the center of all modern administration meant that they deserved a position within bureaucracy, much the same as, for example, royal regalia would have within monarchy, or spiritual relics would have within different form of religious practices. And these stamps, they also tell us something about how official power has been executed during the 20th century. This procurement has not been made in accordance with the regulations of the Swedish Armed Forces. Capital statement, 12 months notice, no free withdrawal right. Confidential according to paragraph 4 in the Secrecy Act. The stamps, they have a short and compressed language, which is a sort of concentrate of various rules, laws, and decisions. The concise official wording, it's practical. It has a necessary objective tone, which is intended to give everyone an equal treatment. All those people whose documents actually being stamped. But at the same time, they convey a linear and simplified view of reality. A way of looking at our surrounding world that can almost be described as an economic approach. Because the stamps, they often describe binary arrangements, such as approvals or denials, a kind of categorization into plus accounts or minus accounts, divisions into different list items. Many stamps also contain clear and concrete wording linked to money and financial transactions, as they be used for disbursements, granting of credit, payment, invoicing, and verification. They carry an economic language that we recognize as cold and distant. And at the same time, it's a language that we need to learn, that we need to master in order to navigate society. A language that we incorporate and that kind of saturates us. And it's also possible to discern a rhythm from the stamps, where we can hear the impact of financial instruments, a steady pace in the wording, a captivating sequence. As we still lack payment for this invoice, we ask you to settle it immediately. reservations are made that deposited funds may be withdrawn without the chief guardian's permission. The check was presented for payment on this day, but was not redeemed due to insufficient funds. Disposed of individually by the guardians of the bank book owner without the permission of the chief guardian. In the event of delayed payment, interest is charged for the year according to an interest rate that corresponds to the rate established by the National Bank at any given time with the addition of X percentage points. Interest rate of 1964. Interest rate of 1965. Interest rate of 1966. Interest rate of 1967. Interest rate of 1968. Not redeemed within the stipulated time. The parents separately. As we still, despite the repeated reminders, lack payment for this invoice, we feel compelled to submit this case to debt collection in 10 days, whereby collection costs may be added. Annulled. The stamps, they convey a rational objectivity, and many of them have a clear distancing content. Rejections, debits, disallowances, denials. They are not only beautiful and a bit cute objects. They are also tools that have both tormented and haunted people. And collecting these stamps has given myself a great satisfaction, both in the actual search and hunt for new items to the collection, and also in the kind of tidy sorting and organizing that a collection constitutes. But the activity of collecting also makes me a bit uncomfortable, because there is something in this in them that feels threatening, in this perspective that they convey, a very specific one-eyed gaze, which is completely and clearly defined and does not give room for any forms of alternative interpretations. Until not so long ago, I worked for the municipality, the city of Gothenburg, in the cultural administration. Here I worked with public tender and procurement of public art, which was a very thorough job. It was important that all the wording was accurate and everything was correctly done. The details in various documents were precisely designed. And I worked about 1.5 years with this, and it was a nice work. I had very nice colleagues, we had fun coffee breaks, and I learned some new things. But at the same time, it felt a bit dangerous, because there is something with the structuring itself which is connected to this mathematical way of dealing with problems. That's so wonderful. To master structures, setting frameworks, giving definitions. Excel with 200 rows and 30 columns. It's a delight. Detailed timelines, confidentiality agreements, procurement documents, project-oriented goals, which are broken down into a multitude of specific tasks. The sense of order is utterly satisfied. And it's also tempting to kind of wallow and bathe in this world of grids and bullet points and numbers. But I began to get this creeping feeling that all was not right here. That there was something menacing about this work. It was both sweet and tempting, but with a kind of growing, moldy aftertaste. And I felt that I needed to protect myself in some way, to do something to resist this logic of constant structuring, to battle this very specific addictive craving that came with systematization. So I tried to find different ways to shield myself, to resist with different small means. And after a while, I found one way that I thought that worked out pretty well. I started to produce small protective figures for my office. These figures, they were built up from materials from my workplace, from discarded papers, from the recycling bin situated next to the copier. And these papers, I folded them, I tore little strips, I knit little knots, and I braided little braids, and I formed these little people. One for every day I was physically present at the office. And I also had to give them life and make them function, to give them energy somehow. So each of them it's enhanced by one drop of my own blood. And these figures, I placed them next to me where I sat at the computer. And from here, they helped me. They helped me to take over some of this danger that I faced during a regular workday. They kind of soaked up this risky, sweet feeling of control, like little wasps. And they also needed to be replaced every day, because otherwise they would become overloaded. They would begin to carry too much, and eventually they would break. Because there are many people who are aware of this danger that is growing within different institutions, public operations, government-controlled companies, or private enterprises. We are exposed to a kind of low-intensity structural influence that affects how we speak, think, write, move, and act in our workplaces. And in many professions, this danger may be more obvious and physical. Like, for example, if you're a construction worker, you will fall down from the scaffolding and kill yourself or hurt yourself. Or if you work at a nursing home, you can break your back working day in and day out. But in professions that are made up largely of administration, it's the robot-like everyday routines that slowly takes its toll. For example, a municipal operations manager that I talked to from a small Swedish municipality, she said that there are so many rules in the form of guidelines and regulatory documents in a municipality. And it's also up to her as a public official to keep track of all of them, which is an impossibility. There are so many rules that she simply cannot keep track of all of the rules she's breaking in a single work week. And there are also many who find and invent their own methods of resistance to this. where individual small risks, ethical considerations, and sometimes barely perceptible initiatives become important and full of meaning. An employee at a healthcare company in Sweden has as one of her duties to issue high-cost protection cards for cost-free medicine. She sometimes chooses to overlook the first date stamp in the patient's high-cost protection booklets. The employee did not change the dates themselves, but instead began the compilation of costs from visit number 2 instead of visit number 1. Thus allowing the patient to enjoy high-cost coverage and free medicine for a longer period than they otherwise would. An employee of the municipality has the habit of opening up the workplace shower, lunchroom, and supply of coffee to homeless persons. A teacher takes on the personal responsibility for a student that's absent from school so that the student can remain within the warmth of the system and continue to receive his study grant. I hadn't managed to receive healthcare allowances at work this year either. This allowance would cover a gym card. Not that I go to the gym, but still, that card is expensive. And I'm the one who refills toilet paper, which is also bought by another company that we share an office with. So stealing toilet paper from work, it somehow becomes a bit vague. And we usually go to the big city for conferences. There's usually a sort of competition in living cheaply. The managers, they book rooms in cheap hostels to set a good example. But I had never stayed at a 5-star hotel. Who has done that? Movie stars, maybe. The logic that you will become a movie star if you do that, it doesn't hold up. But I booked a night in a new hotel that used to be a bank. It cost 2,000 kronor, the equivalent of 500 rolls of toilet paper. in the same way that we try to sort and organize in our surrounding environment, in everyday work, in our homes and in our social relationships, so that our immediate universe becomes comprehensible. We also try to sort and organize in ourselves, so that we become comprehensible. To satisfy our desire for order, we are quick to organize ourselves into different compartments, to simplify ourselves according to different possible characteristics, traits, or belongings. And in this way, we kind of create a consciously shaped persona, form of semi-public profile, an avatar. And these processes of simplification cut through ourselves on the vertical. It's these avatars and profiles that populate our workplaces, football teams, internet forums, groups of friends and family parties. And the simplifications, they also interact with other harmful sorting mechanisms such as money, language, national borders, skin pigment, or the number of filled bookshelves in our living rooms. And together, all these processes form an intricate grid, which is constantly in flux, ever changing its shape. Because at some point in history, things got out of hand. We reached a tipping point, we crossed a line. And whether this was at the dawn of agriculture, if it came with the invention of the postal service, or if it was with the famous Fordist conveyor belt, or if it was first with the takeover of computers or the user-generated web, it's hard to know. But since this line was crossed, the multitude of processes that work together to form reality into categories have begun to live a life of its own. These forms of simplifications form large, slow, wave-like movements that roll relentlessly beneath the surface. And it's a kind of forced movement forward, which despite all its different expressions, it's uniform. And these forces, they constitute the actual playing field and the language. They are the basis for many of our compulsive destructive rituals. And these forces, they are also masters at ordering everything into their own logic. But escaping these categories, creating spaces where it's possible to make other forms of choices or decisions, together finding ways out, locating holes and loopholes in this tightly woven web. It all requires a finely tuned and sensitive skill set. In 2010, Joaquin Garcia, a Spanish civil servant, was about to be rewarded after 20 years of loyal service to the local authorities in the southern Spanish city of Cadiz. However, there was a problem. The long and loyal service was perhaps not as long or as loyal as one first had thought, because Joaquin had actually not been at work for the past 6 years. Joaquin was tasked with overseeing the construction of a water treatment plant in the city. However, the company responsible for the construction had not seen him on the job for several years. He just assumed that he stayed at his office in the city hall. But on the other hand, the authorities in the city had assumed that he was with the construction company. Joaquin, he had been reassigned already in 1995, and about a year after this he found himself without tasks and he had nothing to do. He therefore lacked work duties for as much as 14 years. And he chose not to report this lack of work to the authorities because he was afraid that he would get fired and lose his job at his old age. So instead he chose to come less and less to work, and eventually he didn't show up at all. And when this was all discovered, he became widely known in Spain as El Funcionario Fantasma, the ghost clerk. And over the years, he instead chose to read up on and specialize himself in philosophy. Three years ago, an employee at the bank in southern Österbotten in Finland transferred around 4 million kronor from the bank's accounts to his own accounts. The around 30-year-old employee transferred the money in many small transactions over a period of 2 months. In 2017, it was discovered that an employee of a Swedish commercial bank had been creating fake or exaggerated loans for both real and fictitious companies for more than 4 years. The employee, who was in her 50s, lent out a total of 12 million kronor, of which 1.2 million was transferred to her own account. A police officer in the local police area of Kronoberg County in Sweden was sentenced 2 years ago to a suspended sentence for stealing 1 package of coffee from the police station. The value of the coffee was 25 kronor. The policeman was convicted of theft and was fired. A former foreign ministry official and employee of the Swedish Migration Agency was arrested in 2019 on suspicion of having helped over 100 Afghan citizens to obtain visas to Sweden on false premises. During his time at the Swedish Embassy in Asia, the employee came in contact with Afghans who wanted to come to Sweden, and with the help of falsified documents, made up assignments and invitations, he enabled professional smuggling of people. The employee, who was suspected of being behind this, is in his 50s and started working at the Swedish Migration Agency around the year 2000. The employee had a managerial position and extensive experience in the work. And with this falsified visas, the Afghan had been able to come to Sweden for a short visit. And once in the country, they could then apply for a residence permit with a different name, and many of them could be granted asylum on rightful grounds. Because there is a site-specific, situational resistance based in professional life, which look different depending on which profession you're in. And the examples we know are the uncovered ones, the one that we have discovered. The others are below the surface, not visible to the naked eye. And a certain competence is required, a form of professional cunning. There are, for example, employment agents who navigate the system to not have to move job seekers out into the cold. There are employees of insurance companies consciously turn a blind eye. Social workers who operate outside of their work descriptions. There are doctors who are at the risk of losing their medical certificates, prescribe sleep medication to seriously ill people who do not have a possibility of receiving help in assisted suicide. Or other doctors who exaggerate so-called objective investigation findings to get the authorities to grant sick leave to sick persons. And these ways of navigating conflicting system and logics, where basic moral belief is at odds with a strict system. All these different actions, they constitute a form of resistance rituals, where public officials, clerks, and service personnel in different places utter specific words and perform actions over and over again. In a mostly desolate and barren environment, they try to bend powers greater than themselves. So hard to do things differently. The clothes worn for work, they are rough, they scrape the skin. The supermarkets and the membership benefits create a kind of chronic eczema on the inside of the chest. And both ears are itching from all the circular feedback in the radio and in various podcasts. So frustrating when I cannot open all the plastic packagings. And my eyes are tearing both from a kind of indefinable sadness, but also because the flow on my screen is moving so fast. But maybe it will work out soon. After this particular peak at work, maybe things will calm down. Potted plants, little children and little animals, they actually grow up. And maybe soon we'll go for a drink after work. Or maybe let's start planning the holiday instead. Catch our breath, and then fast as hell, barbecue, barbecue, barbecue. And then some swimming, and then some more, barbecue, barbecue, barbecue. And then nothing more. The ocean water, it was too salty. But next year, God damn it. It feels like it should be another way. but it never seems to just loosen up a bit. It seems always just out of reach. I am a university teacher, and as such I'm far down in the academic hierarchy. It's researchers who devote their lives to chasing research funding, who constantly adapt their questions and thinking to the opportune, who are constantly demonstrating their compliance, that are rewarded in today's universities. Researchers who vomit up text that few or none ever reads, brochure-like text, often in stumbling, incomprehensible English. Text that my supervisor once warned me about, as it probably causes brain damage. And as a teacher, you instead meet students, and your existence is structured by something called staffing. The teachers, they are sprinkled out by administrators on various courses, with predetermined learning objectives, predetermined course literature, predetermined learning activities. It's basically kind of rituals, predetermined examination criteria. As a teacher, I'm in this way usually sprinkled into some dozen different courses each semester, which usually means that I get to meet just over 100 students, who of course think that I am someone completely different from who I am. While at the same time, I do not get the chance to understand anything about who the students really are. Our meeting is basically meaningless. It rests on an illusion of effective knowledge production. You should be available in every way possible, on Teams, chat, SharePoint, mail, phone. Just come over or call me if you want something. All these communication channels and storage disks, iDisk, eDisk folder, Lotus Notes, SharePoint, OneDisk. It's fucked up when senior managers get away with anything as long as they deliver on the last page. These are often managers who do not hesitate for a second to kick downwards, to look better at themselves upwards. All seasonal workers were divided into 4 teams. On the coffee break, when you took a coffee cup, it was important to take a cup with your team number on it. But those who were permanent employees got a coffee cup with their name on it. In the summer, when the regular manager was on vacation, the former manager worked in his stead. And he was determined to fire you or get you to quit if he decided that he didn't want you there. And then when he succeeded and the person he got rid of was a permanent employee, he kept their coffee cup with a name on it. And in his office, he had a shelf with all the trophies lined up. I get sick from my workplace and develop anxiety just from the thought of it. Right now, I'm on parental leave and I will not return during any circumstances. I wanted to resign because of a small bug in an Excel sheet. Although this is the job I've had the longest in my life. And even though it's probably not even a bug.
Do fast i stjärnsträngfunden.
There is a certain form of loneliness when it's so difficult to express what's wrong. The anger that is built up has nowhere to go. It cannot reside anywhere except for in the own body, or it slowly seeps out and is directed towards something less significant in the immediate area. Our own desolation can cause us to lose our direction, remain in our ivory towers, licking our own wounds and forgetting who our allies really are. It's a fatal development that makes us end up in a bitter and disconnected world. But the frustration can find other ways. We are not alone. The various threatening formats that we encounter in professional life, they are strong, but there are other alternative ritual behaviors that can harbor and contain other more thoughtful, strange, and slow values. Because there is a transcendental bureaucracy, a bureaucracy that extends beyond the categories of things, a parallel bureaucracy that reinterprets symbols and invents new signs, where the act of making becomes meaningful and gives us shelter. Here we can see an institution-specific face painting. Graphic elements from the institution's logo have been painted onto the employee's face. And in this case, it's Anna that works for the county administrative board. And this form of face painting acts as a form of community building symbol, strengthens the sense of belonging. For example, Fredrika, system analysts at the city of Gothenburg. And there is such a painting for every institution, company, or workplace. They function as a kind of code, a sign that targets those who are on the same wavelengths. As for Ylva here, who works as a regional developer. It builds a different form of recognition where an alternative parallel track to the traditional workplace culture is created. As for Björn here. working for the government institution of Formas. It's a form of site-specific subculture with alternative avatars and different profiles that have their own institutional corpse paint. Because a clear and well-defined opposition is welcomed by some, as it can either be dismissed easily or embraced and absorbed. And therefore other forms of resistance are being developed. Resistance that lie close to its counterpart, almost looking like one in the crowd, but a bit odd and a bit strange. And the seductive power of sorting and categorizing is redirected, finds new forms and is subdued. Alternative forms of administration arise, emotions bubble up from the underground and arrange themselves crosswise in the boxes. Disembodied forms of organization emerge from the darkness. The ambiguous and strange is used with care. In the strategies, they are asymmetrical. Concepts such as double standards, gaseous form, and elusiveness becomes a strength. Ambivalence and grey areas are skillfully navigate to keep you a few millimeters under the radar. It's a balancing act on the verge of darkness, a craft in delicately using the ugly, the crooked, and the small to slowly drill your way forward. The shadow bureaucracy duplicates existing phenomena, words and actions in something that at the first glance constitutes a duplicate or an exact copy, but which hides a completely different warmth. We need to protect ourselves, use powerful symbols, take them over and make them familiar, and weave alternative safety nets. Thank you very much.